Hare Krishna. It's that magic moment. So, how do we proceed now? What?
You can give a class.
Okay, we're going to be doing some initiations. And following Prabhupada's system, I will explain something about the ceremony. First, well, actually, we should also mention that today is the appearance day of Lord Narasingha. And Krishna is, what's the word? Well, Krishna is many things, but he's also playful. He's not playful in an infantile way, although he can do that also. But it's interesting because many people have observed, many philosophers or thinkers or poets have observed that there's a type of innocence in childhood. I mean, everyone knows that. There's an innocence, especially those who have good parents. There's an innocence in childhood. And then when you get to a certain age, one loses that innocence and life becomes more complicated. And so if we analyze what is it that actually complicates life, why can't we stay in this sort of innocent, joyful state, childhood, playing, having our friends, feeling completely secure, and so on? What actually changes? And it's very simple. What changes is, for one thing, the material body reaches puberty, and gradually one develops into a potentially reproducing animal. And I didn't mean to cast aspersions on reproduction, but it is a fact that nature's way, in order to induce people to actually go ahead and reproduce, there's obviously a certain pleasure associated with the reproductive act. Of course, nowadays that pleasure has been sort of separated from reproduction, and that itself is sociologically, on a long-term historical basis, very dangerous and ultimately degrading. And that's another topic. And I'm speaking now not just as a Sunday morning preacher, that, you know, like that definition of a priest. It's a priest is someone who has a deep-rooted fear that someone somewhere may be having a good time. So not in that sense, but that involves a lot of sociology, a lot of psychology and so on. But suffice it to say that when we have material desires, especially sexual desires, you start to see some people differently. Let's say you're in school and you're developing sexual desires, and you find another person attractive. Obviously, you don't see that person the way you did a year or two ago. Everything changes. There are these very strong desires. With that desire comes fear of rejection, jealousy, because resentment, if the person you are attracted to is not attracted to you, then there's resentment or there's depression. So if you just think of all these emotions which are inevitable, jealousy, desire to possess, resentment, depression. There are all these new emotions that come with this very strong desire to physically possess another human being. And of course, attachments form. I've sort of, talked about the scenario where you don't get the person you want, but what if you do get the person you want? And then there are all kinds of commitments. There are financial commitments. There are all kinds of responsibilities. And so, and also as we grow, as we grow out of childhood, that you could say physiological process kind of awakens all kinds of ambitions to be famous, to be powerful, to be respected, things that children don't normally think of. Or if they do think of it, it's in a very simple, innocent way. So there goes the childhood. And then, of course, if one actually has children, then the romantic couple become mom and dad, which is not always so romantic. It's interesting. The most popular and famous romantic novelist in history is Jane Austen, just in terms of books sold, in terms of how many movies they've made, and so on and so forth, even academic attention. And what's interesting that I know there's some fellow Janeites here, that what's interesting is she wrote 6 mature novels, and in all of those 6 novels, at the end of every novel, the girl gets the guy gets the girl. These people that are in love actually marry, and that's it. You never hear about children. You never hear about what happened afterwards. There are, of course, always people attempt to write sequels to her novels, and usually they're strikingly bad. But in her own novels, because in a sense, things start to get less romantic. So getting back to Krishna, the reason I brought all this up is not because of my own sort of dark obsessions, but the reason I actually brought this up is because Krishna is very playful, and some people may think, well, he should be more mature, he's God. Or why should Krishna come in all these amazing avatars, as a fish, as a boar, as a great king, even as a beautiful woman? Why does Krishna is famous? If you look at the whole pantheon of in Asia, including Buddhism, which was highly influenced by what you could call Hinduism in many ways. But you have this whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, and then you have Krishna. What's interesting is, if you basically study all the gods and goddesses of Asia, and I say Asia, not just India, because of the very strong and obvious influence. I mean, Buddhism, for example, came from India. And by the time Buddhism migrated to Eastern Asia, or even you could say Tibet or Sri Lanka, and of course China, and then eventually Japan, by that time, it already had been heavily influenced by its matrix, which was Vedic culture in India. So, but what's striking is that the notion that God, whoever somebody thinks God is, or whatever form of God they choose to worship, what's striking is that the one deity that really made it big, so to speak, in terms of having a whole theology of avatars, where that this deity can come to the world, come to this world, or come to other worlds in many different amazing forms. That's really Krishna. And what we see is that other, you could say, traditions, such as the Shaiva tradition or the Shakta tradition in India, or certain types of personalist Buddhist traditions, they kind of, keeping up with the Dasas, keeping up with the Joneses. So they wanted to also come up with avatars. Whoops, Get so many living entity things that are living anyway, that attracts a living entity. So it's really Krishna. It didn't work. And the other tradition, because it's not something you can invent. It's not something you create, because if it were true, as so many people say, that human beings just invent theologies, that actually nothing is really real except the physical world, and human beings, for this or that psychological reason, invent these ideas, then it would stand to reason that one should be equally able to invent, for example, avatar theology in any tradition. Because if it's just a question of human psychology, in every spiritual religious tradition, there are lots of clever people and good writers and people that have good imaginations, and they could just fulfill the same psychological need in their tradition that the Krishna avatars fulfilled in this one. And if you can create one here, you can create one there. You can build cars in Detroit, you can build cars in Tokyo, you can build cars in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I mean, if you know how to build cars, you just build cars. But what's interesting is that's not actually what happened. That's not what happened. Whoever tried to come up with an avatar theology, it kind of flopped because it wasn't real. It's just, people wanted to have one. But in the case of Krishna, his avatars have been uniquely attractive. This is just history. This is not just me being dogmatic. This is just history. And the avatars of Krishna, and of course there are innumerable avatars. Avatara Hyasankyeya Hare. It's a verse in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, which literally means the avatars of Hari or Krishna are literally innumerable. That's literally what it means. Asankyeya, innumerable. And so, because most people don't have time to read about innumerable avatars, there's been a cultural focus on 10 called the Dashavatars. The word Dasha in Sanskrit means 10. That's where we get words like decimal, tens, or diez in Spanish, dez in Portuguese, right? So the Dashavatars. And the reason I brought up the other point about like the psychology of puberty, the psychology of marriage, psychology of reproduction, is because if you remain, let's say, in a neutral sense of the word, because I don't want to offend anyone, if you remain innocent of that aspect of life, the sense of innocent means you just never really get into it. So if there's a conscious being who never experiences material lust, never experiences material sex desire, and never develops other psychological symptoms such as envy, resentment, jealousy, attachment. Attachment should never be confused with love. Attachment means you want to enjoy another person. Love means you want the other person to enjoy. So it's a very common mistake to think that like I'm attached to this person, therefore I love this person, which is really getting things backwards. When you love someone, you don't want to take anything from that person. You want them to have everything good. We've seen, for example, parents that want to sort of exploit their children to satisfy all the parents' unfulfilled desires. Like, actually, I had experience of this when I was a kid. My parents had friends, another couple, who were nice people, but the wife of this other couple, she had her dream when she was a girl had been to be like a famous entertainer, and she didn't quite make it. And so she had one daughter, and she just buried this daughter alive under acting classes and singing classes and dancing classes. And the girl was kind of unhappy because whenever they would come over, like just a normal social visit, and her mother would always say to her daughter, okay, you have to perform. And we were just young guys, so what were we going to do but just laugh, because we were just young boys. But And I remember I could see, even as a child, I could see what was that's like a really bad way of parenting. Instead of studying your child and seeing, rather than, I want to fulfill my dreams, my unfulfilled dreams through my child. So in that sense, also attachment. That's what love and attachment are not the same. So to say that Krishna or God is absolutely detached doesn't mean he doesn't love us, because those two things are different. So Krishna, even though Krishna is mature, I mean, he's not like childish, literally, in the sense that he has undeveloped cognitive ability. I mean, Krishna, he's not literally, I mean, after all, creating millions of universes takes a little know-how. You have to have at least a master's degree in engineering. You're creating universes. So Krishna is omniscient. He's supremely, infinitely intelligent, and yet there's a purity about Krishna, innocent. Because if you were God, basically, you could exploit anyone you wanted in any way you wanted. There's a famous story told by Plato of Gyges, who was a sort of not exactly a great guy, and he somehow got this magical ring. Plato, if you know Plato, he Plato's famous for saying that you can explain things philosophically, but some people can't really do philosophy, so you have to tell myths, you have to tell stories. And of course, one of the most famous stories of Plato, and scholars are not really sure whether he's making this up or just telling stories, that because mythos in Greek doesn't necessarily mean it's not true. So one of the famous myths of Plato is, of course, the story of Atlantis. That's where we get the story of Atlantis. And it's interesting, this great city that sunk, Plato connected as Mute me.
Yes.
So, so Krishna, the fact that Krishna comes as a boar, I mean, is that some like very serious theological thing? No, it's Krishna goofing off. It's not like there's some, powerful, hidden, esoteric interpretation that when the Bhagavatam says boar, it really means a certain energy that causes daffodils to grow or something. Anyway, it's just Krishna having a good time. It's Krishna being playful. So you could say, well, someone is God, and because our concept of God tends to be like super serious, like the Judeo-Christian God really has very little sense of humor. That's one thing. I mean, you don't find the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob cracking a lot of jokes. And so here's someone. So the real thing you could say, well, is Krishna really God, or is God Krishna? The way I put it is that what we call God is just Krishna kind of doing his duty, because a lot of people in this world, they can relate to a very serious God who judges and punishes, although that's becoming less popular nowadays, sort of out of fashion. But so the idea of God, someone could be God, but not just a father. The spiritual world, and some of you will be very happy to hear this, the spiritual world is not a patriarchy. So, of course, the ultra conservatives may want a refund. But so in the spiritual world, Krishna's playing. So we associate, I mean, the problem is we are materially conditioned. We associate playing with being immature, with not having a fully developed brain, being innocent, but at the cost of not really understanding things, because that's what a child is. But in Krishna's case, he's playful, he's mischievous, but he's really bright. I mean, he's still God. So it's kind of reversal. Prabhupada once said that because in sort of in the Neoplatonic sense, this world is just a reflection of the spiritual world. So if you look into very clear water, crystal clear water, let's say a pond, and there's an apple tree growing on the side of the pond, you see a reflection of the apple tree. It's upside down. And so although it's upside down, and although it's a mere reflection, it does actually show you exactly what an apple tree looks like. The bad news is it's just a reflection, and it's upside down, and you can't eat the reflected apples. If you're hungry, you can splash around in the pond. You can't eat the reflected apples. The good news is the reflection tells you exactly what a real apple looks like. So that's the example that Krishna gives at the beginning of chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, Urdhva Moolam Adakshaka, there's a tree whose roots grow upward. Urdhva means upwards. Moolam, the roots. Urdhva Moolam Adhak, downward, Shaka, the branches. So that means that in this world, when you're immature and you don't really understand the world, you're like an innocent child playing. As you are educated, as you become mature, as you learn about the world, you're no longer childish. But that's simply a reflection, an upside down reflection of reality. Because on the spiritual plane, when you're not as advanced, you are like, God is just something for which you have great reverence. It's always very serious and dangerous. And whereas in the spiritual platform, that concept of God is the lower stage. And you actually grow up spiritually by becoming a child again. So it's actually the opposite of the material sequence. I thought I'd point that out. If you like that idea, be sure to give generously before you leave. That's a joke, sorry. So, so Krishna, so we associate that kind of behavior being very playful and coming in all like kids, you know, they say, okay, I'm going to be a boar, I'm going to be a fish. And, you know, that's how kids play. So we associate that childish behavior with immaturity, an undeveloped awareness of the world, and so on. Whereas in Krishna, it's the highest spiritual understanding of God. It's real freedom. It's so Krishna does come in all these avatars. I mean, they're amazing. They're very creative. I mean, why does Krishna come as a boar? I mean, everyone knows, the culture into which Krishna descended as a boar, Lord Varaha. Everyone in that culture knew a hog is a hog. I mean, it wasn't some primitive culture that worshiped hog totems or something. It's not that Krishna came as a boar because that culture was kind of like predisposed to worship hogs. I mean, they thought a hog was a hog. Not that, you know, you don't kill them, but not the most elegant creature, although they're intelligent. So Krishna, even back then, even so many thousands of years ago, when Krishna came as Lord Varaha, he was kind of laughing at everyone. And so that's Krishna. So if we, in our spiritual practice, in our practice of bhakti yoga, if we still have material desires because of our own conditioned consciousness, because we are still subject to jealousy, resentment, depression, anger, therefore we may not think it's so funny that Krishna comes like that, because we're still in a stage where we associate growing up or becoming more mature or more intelligent with giving up childishness. But when you become advanced in Krishna consciousness, you actually recover, you reawaken your eternal playfulness to be an eternal youth, innocent, but it comes with advanced intelligence and a powerful moral compass and self-realization. So my own experience, my experience of obviously externally imperceptibly aging my body. I know it's when I think back to my first youth, Pratama Jovana, when I think back when I was, you know, physically young and all that, and I can also remember that I was a little, there are a lot of things I didn't quite understand perfectly, although being a leader in the Hare Krishna movement, I would never suspect for a moment that I ever made mistakes. And so anyway, so that physical youth kind of blew away. You know that song, Fiddler on the Roof, sunrise, sunset. So that physical youth is gone, but now, as I hopefully advance in Krishna consciousness, I'm experiencing real youth. When I was, you know, physically younger, it was just brand X. It wasn't my real youth. It was just based on the body. And therefore it came with a lot of immaturity, some sort of wrong decisions, and just not being able to treat other people in the way that ultimately, ideally, we should treat other people. That's someone hurrying to get here to be initiated. So I am able to appeal to all different classes of people. So anyway, So my experience now is that I'm experiencing my real youth. And when I can, because more and more I'm awakening my real spiritual identity, and which is eternally youthful. What I'm experiencing now to what God, I mean, this is so much better. This is real youth. And so when you come to that point, which is a good news, that you can be young forever. First of all, you realize that was his spiritual name was Peter Pan. Anyway, just kidding. So that's the good news. So when you awaken the spiritual youth, then you totally relate to Krishna. You can it becomes so obvious what Krishna's doing. And you want to jump in, you want to join the game. It's like when you're a kid and you see some other kids are playing a game and you want to get into the game. You want to play in the game. And so those are some things I wanted to mention about Krishna, about the amazing as we approach Krishna. Prabhupada gave become more and more like Krishna. We just become a cessful nature. And that's why being initiated, it's not that initiation is, okay, I got the prize. I actually had one disciple in Brazil. I won't mention that person's name or gender. But this person really wanted to be initiated and was like, and finally, qualified and got initiated. And that's the last time we ever saw him. And then it turned out that this person collected initiations. Because I saw a picture on the wall of his bedroom. He had like about 50 different initiations, and he collected them from all kinds of different groups. So actually, I mean, the word initiation, to initiate, means we're beginning. So I'd say the most important thing for those who are being initiated, or for those who are already initiated or who aspire to it, the most important thing is to understand that you have to keep going. So if you're climbing a mountain, it's natural. You climb for a while, you reach a little plateau, you stop and rest. Natural. But if you reach the plateau and just stop, then you never make it to the top. So if your plateau starts to extend for a year, 2 years, 3 years, well, I guess it's been a good 8 years now, 20 years. I mean, we've seen some very, very long-lasting plateaus in the Hare Krishna movement. In fact, they look like they're going to be lifelong plateaus. So the real point in Krishna consciousness is to keep going forward. And that way, for the rest of your life, before you actually go back to Krishna, you will have that excitement, that bliss, that thrill, that thrilling life of always discovering something new. Just like, for example, some devotees came from, Sankarsana and Brinda. They came from the UK, and the topography and the scenery in the UK is slightly different from California. And so when they saw like all these mountains and everything, they were like really impressed, and they were really enjoying the view, just like I really enjoy going to England. So if you continue advancing, at every moment, your life will be thrilling. Your life will be thrilling. You'll be experiencing newer and newer pleasure. And rather than falling back into old bad habits, those old bad habits will become for us more and more absurd. Like, how did I ever really think? I mean, there's this great story in Charles Dickens, this novel called Little Dorrit. There's a great BBC multi-part movie of that. Anyway, I won't go into all that. But and so there's this one scene where the hero of the story, who's he sort of, his mother was kind of cruel and he was sent off to the, this is a common theme in Charles Dickens. You sort of have a cruel father, a cruel mother, and they send you off to the continent to be educated, sort of get rid of you. So he finally comes back, and he's going to inherit a fortune. And he comes back, and he's a little, what's the word? Not depressed, but doesn't have a lot of self-confidence because of just the way he was parented and so on, the way he was kind of rejected. And so, but he's the hero of the story, who, spoiler alert, who gets little Dorrit. So he goes to see, he has to go see this man, businessman, and partner of his father, about his age. He was madly in love with him as a young boy. He's sort of like a young teenager, and he was just like, she was the goddess. He was madly in love with her. And so he's going to see her for the first time in years, and he's so nervous. And he just, well, what's a nice way to say how nervous he was? He was anyway very nervous. And so he's waiting there, and the girl's going to come downstairs from her quarters. Finally, she comes down, really, because she's not at all attractive. And this is the story. This is not just a male chauvinist story, because it's just as much true of girls and boys. And so he sees her, and it's just to hide the shock. You hurt her feelings, gained some weight. And anyway, so what I mean to say is the point here is that as you advance in Krishna consciousness, you kind of have that experience from little Dorrit, in the sense that things that you thought were attractive, things that you were attached to, begin to look absurd, like ridiculous. And you just like, you can hardly believe that you were ever attracted. Just spent
Se desconecta el internet, se queda así.
So we're not going to, harass anyone here. Like, why are you here? What's your motive? But the fact is that if we came to Krishna consciousness with some motive, then at a certain point we'll sort of be quote unquote satisfied. Drive way to Krishna, to complete self-realization, complete liberation. So that's really the secret. Even if one came for some other motive, if at this point, if you can understand Krishna, and become attached to Krishna, then you can, you can switch to the I want to love Krishna category. And so that's the reason. So those who are being initiated, initiation is not just so that, I'm respected by my community, or people don't think I'm weird because I've been chanting Hare Krishna for so long. That's not the reason to get initiated. The reason is because you are determined to keep working at this until you completely rediscover your true self, and until you recover your eternal life of perfect happiness. And so that's what we have to do. So I think that was a reasonably to the point initiation lecture. So any questions? Yes. Can't hear you. If you have a question, please come forward. Yes.
The apple tree is the same. I wonder about the emotions and also reflection, how bad they are in material world compared to the
Well,
spirit.
yeah, because in this world, the more you're attached to someone, the more you think you love them. Whereas attachment is actually the opposite of love. And that's why, such a, I don't want to say healthy percentage, such a large percentage of murders are crimes of passion. Because so many people, the person they claim to love the most is the person they killed, or the person they abused, or the person. No, that's fine. That's fine. Just because you're, that's fine. You're fine. So the point is that even, it's the most common thing in the world. Obviously, killing someone is going to an insane extreme, but it's the most common thing in the world. The two people were really attached to each other, and at the end of everything, they hate each other. It's like you don't hate anyone as much as you hate the person you used to be so much in love with. That's only too common. Real love cannot turn to hate. Here's a takeaway for today. I'm not going to charge extra for. Real love never turns into hate. What turns into hate is attachment. Because, so why are Krishna called the Bhagavad Gita, of course, are called raga, dvesha, attachment and hatred? Why are they so close? Because obviously if they weren't so close, how do they just, shift back and forth? And then the person you hate, if they finally get the memo, maybe you love them again. So why are love and hate so close? Because in both cases, you want to lord it over the other person. When I'm attached to someone, it means I want them to please me. And I think that person should please me. And if they don't please me, I hate them for frustrating me. And so that's a whole doctoral dissertation in the field of psychology. But, why love and hate are so close? And they're very close. It's just like if you have a climate control apparatus in your room, this button cold, that button hot, same machine. So the same machine produces love and hate. And therefore, it's the opposite of love. Compassion is compassion. And of course, we know that there's a material mode of goodness. So in the material mode of goodness, one has compassion, but we also know that the material mode of goodness is not pure. It's better than nothing. But when goodness becomes purified, it's called purified goodness, Shuddha Sattva or Vishuddha Sattva. So what is the impurity of material goodness? There's still some attachment. Krishna describes that, by the way, in the Gita. He says, Atrat Sattang Nirmalatvat Prakashakam Anami. Because the material mode of goodness is relatively pure, he says Prakashakam, enlightening. From material goodness, you actually get wisdom. There's a lot of people all over the world, they may, with hundreds of different spiritual practices, hundreds of different things, who all come to very similar conclusions. Like, for example, I shouldn't kill animals, or I shouldn't eat animals, or I should be nice to other people. I shouldn't be a racist. I shouldn't be a sexist. So you find that there's a certain basic understanding which good people all around the world come to. Because knowledge doesn't just come from India. According to the Bhagavad Gita, knowledge comes from goodness. Krishna actually says knowledge comes from goodness, and there are some good people all over the world who come to very similar conclusions. However, what's the impurity? Krishna explains that. Sukha Sangena Badnati. Because material goodness does give you a relative sense of happiness. People who are virtuous are happier than people who are selfish. That's just practical psychology. Good people are happier than selfish people. But what happens is we become attached to that happiness. Or, for example, we know very well some people dedicate their life to helping others because they're just wallowing in the praise they get, that, people admire me and people think I'm a good person. You get status among other people who share those values. So Sukha Sangena Badnati, one becomes attached to the rewards of being a materially good person, and Jnana Sangena Janaga, and one becomes attached to the wisdom. I mentioned that good people all around the world develop sort of a common wisdom. In fact, there's even words for that. For example, in classical civilization, they called it the philosophia perennia, or the perennial philosophy, because philosophers, wise people, whether in China or Japan or India or North America or South America or Europe or Polynesia, wise people or virtuous people tend to develop the same general wisdom, as I mentioned. And people become proud of that. They become proud of their wisdom. They become proud of their virtue, and that attachment, that it binds them again to the material world. And that's why Krishna says the three modes of nature are always turning around. Because when you're in the mode of passion, you finally burn out on selfishness, and then you want to be good, but then you burn out on, and then, goodness, because it becomes boring after a life or two, and then you want to kind of, get into selfishness again, or some people, they just become drug addicts and just merge into darkness. And so these modes just go around. Because they're material modes and they're limited, all of them over an extended time period become boring. Whereas spiritual happiness, because it's ever increasing, your happiness increases forever. It's never boring. Where's Gandhini? Okay. So any other question? No. I can see that we have some hungry people here, and they know that if they keep asking questions, it's just, Prashana is not going to happen. Yes. Pode falar em português e eu traduzo. Tem que gritar ou se aproximar.
Cristãos falam sobre o heaven, né?
Yeah, see. Christians speak about heaven.
And then I went to a funeral.
She went to a funeral.
So people say, oh, so we're gonna be together in heaven, and they talk about. So
Can you hear?
Jesus-
Okay, I'll say.
Jesus is gonna be
You want to
there.
use this microphone because no one can hear you. Anyway, they say that the funeral that people say we're all going to be together in heaven,
And Jesus will be there.
and Jesus will be there. Yes.
And so my question is,
Actually, Natalia, do you want to repeat it?
So my question is,
if Jesus is a pure devotee,
if Jesus is a pure devotee,
so he goes to the spiritual world, so he's already there.
is he in a spiritual world for people that followed Jesus and thought that they were going back to Jesus?
And or it's a special place that Jesus is in the Christians religions.
Is there a special place for Christians to go? Okay, I understand the question. Thank you. Okay, no danger of me making a controversial statement here. Yeah, the question was that that Krishna Varna went to a Christian funeral, and the people were saying we're all going to be together in heaven with Jesus. And so the question is there a place where Jesus is in heaven? Is it the spiritual world as we understand it? And what's up with that? So let's start with Jesus. And therefore I said, there's no possible controversy here. Jesus himself, to the extent that we can derive reliable historical information about Jesus from the four Gospels, and the fact that there are problems with the historicity of the New Testament, this was a conclusion that occurred to Christian theologians about 200 years ago. And it sort of launched this academic project, which has been going on for a couple hundred years, among many faithful, devoted Christians. And that project is called sort of the search for the historical Jesus. So the reason this came up is because when people stopped only reading the New Testament, just every word is infallible and people started reading it, Christians, sort of from a more scholarly point of view, they noticed that a lot of the same stories are repeated in the different Gospels, but there's different versions of them. So if every word in the New Testament is the unerring literal word of God, how could you have four different versions of the same story? So anyway, so who is the historical Jesus? What do we really know about the life of Jesus and what of it? And of course, we know a lot about how the different Gospels were written, who wrote them, what their motives were. And the four Gospel writers had very different motives in terms of the message they were trying to. Just give one simple example, and then I'll get to the point. If you compare Matthew and Luke, who in a sense have completely opposite purposes in writing their Gospels, and all of them wrote their Gospels at least a generation or two after Jesus. So another problem, telephone game. Anyway, the book of Luke wants to emphasize, because apparently Luke was a secretary to Paul. And therefore, when Luke wrote, wants to write a gospel which will reinforce the message of his teacher, Paul. And Paul's message was, let's take it to the world, it's for everybody. And so therefore, Luke writes a gospel emphasizing the universality of Jesus. The universality of Jesus, because that's what his teacher was trying to get across. And of course, to make Jesus universal, he had to kind of reinvent Jesus, because the historical Jesus, who never actually preached to Gentiles, was not necessarily totally relatable. So then you get that problem. To make Jesus relatable, you kind of have to reinvent Jesus. But anyway, that's another story. But then if you look at the book of Matthew, Matthew has the opposite intention. The author of the book of Matthew understands Jesus to be a great figure, divine figure, who came to reform Judaism. Because Judaism, as all religions, have strayed. All religions historically start to veer off the path. They start to deviate in different ways. They kind of lose their original core understanding. And then if they're lucky, a reformer comes along and puts them back on track. So for Matthew, Jesus is the great Jewish reformer who came to save or rectify Judaism. These are two very different pictures. John is a difference. I don't know why I'm telling you all this, but maybe just briefly, just to give you some idea of what's going on. John has a completely different agenda. Because by the time, and by the way, we have no evidence that a person named John wrote that book. But anyway, the book, which is called John, is understood by all scholars to be the latest, the last gospel written. The first one they consider to be Mark. And then you have Matthew and Luke, and then the latest one, which is a few generations after Jesus, is the book of John. You have a button to turn off my mic if I get too comfortable. So John is writing at a time when there has been almost a complete demographic transformation of the Jesus community. And we still don't have Christianity, by the way. I mean, Christianity with that name as a separate religion is something which gradually emerges for various historical reasons. By the time John is writing, there's been this radical demographic transformation of the Jesus community in the sense that a movement which during the life of Jesus was exclusively made up of Jews, exclusively. And then gradually, for various reasons, which I won't go into now, but there are various very clear historical reasons, that it became almost impossible to convert or attract Jews to the Jesus movement, and pagans started joining. And as pagans start joining and totally take over the movement. So by the time you get to John, a movement which was composed exclusively of Jews is a movement composed almost exclusively of pagans. And because Jesus did not give systematic philosophy, I mean, he gave a lot of wisdom, and because the New Testament, the first evidence we have that the New Testament was actually kind of solidified, like everyone agreed, okay, because there were hundreds of books around about Jesus. There were many books, and some people followed these books and some people followed those books. There were many different gospels. And so at a certain point, the church, which has power then because of Constantine, has power to motivate people in other books. He's basically addressing pagans, and it's extremely likely he was a pagan that joined the Jesus movement. And the most obvious evidence of this, I mean, there's lots of evidence, just give you one simple proof. The book of John begins with a statement which has nothing to do really with, or very little to do with Judaism, but has everything to do with pagan culture. And that opening statement of the book of John is, in the beginning was the Logos, which is translated as the Word. In the beginning was the Word. The word that's actually in the book of John is the Logos. So what was the Logos? The Logos is, that's where we get the word logic, or for example, geology, the logic of geos, of the earth, or physiology, the logic of the physical body, and so on. So that was an appeal to pagans, because there were many actually theistic pagans. I mean, pagans had monotheism. The philosophers were often monotheistic. ground people worship. Common thing. So any so I mean the question that long sees, where is Jesus? If you read the New Testament, there's some real wisdom and there's some things that are very problematic in it. I think just from the point of view of reasonable theology, I think there are some serious problems there. Just like we have a lot of theological problems with some of the Vedic literature. Krishna himself says that people who really understand don't take all the Vedas so seriously, and people who take the Vedas very seriously don't really understand. So even in our tradition, Krishna himself says that there are sacred texts which are entry level. It's sort of like piety for dummies. And so even if in the Sanskrit tradition, there are some books that Krishna himself, and most of the things that Krishna says about the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita are somewhat pejorative. The one positive thing he says is, by all the Vedas I am to be known, verse 15:15, but all the other things are kind of pejorative and critical. So therefore, as far as the New Testament, I don't think a person can rationally argue it gives, the highest theology, because there's some problems in it. I mean, the great theologian of the Middle Ages was Augustine, who actually died just as the so-called barbarians were invading Rome. And so he came at the very end of sort of classical antiquity. And then if you look at what came after, but Augustine, his writings, for one thing, he's everyone kind of agrees, a bit misogynistic. He's the first leader of the church who wrote a formal essay justifying or arguing that it is completely justified to kill heretics. That's probably not like a real winner. He comes up with the idea of original sin, which is that, which I think is crazy. It's like if there's a knock at your door and some, what do they call it? What that SWAT team like breaks your door down, comes in to arrest you because, I guess someone consulted with the, all those services that trace your ancestors, like the Mormons do that. Someone in Salt Lake City traced your ancestors, and it turns out that, hundreds of years ago, one of your ancestors killed somebody. And so original sin is because we all bear the guilt of Adam or Eve. So it's just not rational. Or eternal hell. The idea that an infinitely loving father tortures his own children forever for somewhat subtle theological mistakes. So there's all kinds of things that are just like, I don't think so. And Jesus himself said that he's not giving the highest knowledge because these people won't get it. So if you put all that together, I think anyone that claims to know, and I'm sure you can find leaders in ISKCON who claim to know this, anyone that claims to know exactly where Jesus went and exactly where his followers went, I think is really kind of just telling a story. Again, I admire Jesus. I think he definitely was an extraordinary person. I think he loved God. I think he gave a lot of wisdom, but exactly what his level was, I don't claim to know. And I don't see how anyone can rationally claim to know based on the information we have.
So
Loud.
So
louder. Shout.
So
Twist
her
and shout.
so her question
Can
was,
you all hear? I really don't want to keep repeating this.
so if he doesn't have a spiritual planet, where do his followers who firmly believe that when they die they're gonna go to him, where do they go?
They go to a place that's next door to a Govinda's restaurant. No, they go to where they deserve to go. If they really love God, then they'll receive great rewards. If they're hypocrites, they'll go where hypocrites go. If there definitely have been Christians in history who had extraordinary love for God and who made great sacrifices out of this love for God. There is no question about that. There have been real Christian saints, and there have been Jewish saints, and there have been Sufi Muslim saints. So in many traditions, there have been people whose lives were absolutely devoted to God. They clearly had love for God. They're willing to sacrifice anything to please God. And those people receive extraordinary rewards. So that is something I'm sure of, exactly where they went. If you want like a GPS thing for them, exactly where do they go. I don't think we're really in a position to say that. We can say they were elevated. We can say they received great rewards, that they, that they're on their way to perfection. We can definitely say all that. But exactly where they went, I don't think we have enough information. So any other question? Yes. And when you ask questions, just keep in mind the person next to you may be very hungry. Yes. Yes. Yeah, good question. They don't always ask good questions. We have to advance in Krishna consciousness. For a marketing survey, every home in America said, I did the voice, Listerine, it's in your medicine cabinet, use it. And so, bhakti yoga is in your medicine cabinet. And the more sincerely you dedicate yourself to bhakti yoga, the more you're going to advance. And as you advance, you'll be free of all your problems and you will have a wonderful, blissful life of wisdom and love. So thank you all very much. Oh, the initiations now. Oh, so a very dear devotee, Tal from Israel, now living in San Francisco. Where's Mr. James? Where are the names?
I didn't get her name. I got the other ones.
Ah. So, Tal is the surfing champion of Israel.
Wow.
And her sister, older sister, right? Her older sister is the table tennis champion of Israel. And where's Taruni? I want to introduce you all to Taruni, and I'm going to do everything in my power to embarrass her. Taruni is an extraordinary devotee. She's from Israel, and she has a very powerful Krishna West program and helps many people. She's also a famous doctor in Israel. Can I tell them about Bahrain? Taruni represents her country in all kinds of medical conferences, and just very recently she became the first lady to sign a treaty in the country of Bahrain in the Middle East, which is a treaty of medical cooperation. And also she's a lot of fun. So so Taruni, I think, I mentioned Taruni because Taruni has been a big help for you, hasn't she? For Tal. And Taruni, I think, is really an extraordinary example of someone who has been very, very successful in her career out in the world, and at the same time been an extraordinary teacher of Krishna consciousness. So thank you, Taruni. So, because Taruni helped you so much, I wanted to give you a name with T, and also you're tall. Because actually Taruni is also her, what we sometimes do we say any more Carmi name? Her legal name is also Tull, so she calls Tull Junior. So this is Tarani. So your name, first of all, you have to sign the deal, right? Okay, so what is your vow? Because the word devotee in English comes from the Latin devoto. Voto means a vow. That's what the English word vow, to vote for someone, like to support someone. And so devoto, also in Spanish, of course, and Portuguese, it literally means one who lives by a vow. That one who has taken a vow to someone, and their life is to fulfill a vow to another person. And so that's what the word means, devotee. And so now you're making a vow, of course, to Prabhupada and Krishna. I'm just the, what do they call it, the middleman, the agent, right? So I get a cut because I'm an agent. So, okay, so what is your vow?
No meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, and no intoxication.
And
chant 16 rounds every day.
of
Heart Krishna Mama.
so your name will be Tattva Darshi, which means a seer of the truth. And that famous verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, approach a spiritual master, he says, the people who will enlighten you are the Tattva Darshis, those who have seen the truth. And then oh, thank my handler. I would still not a joke.
Very nice, what can I say more, but been very nice devotee. And she dedicated and Pujari, and she loves the community, and she really prays Krishna, teach Krishna, and she has a Govinda fast food, and she's been serving for 20 years and serving with prasadam, and she's excellent.
Who is here?
So Mahamani, where's Mahamani?
That's true.
Is she there?
Open her mind.
Yeah,
Where is he? Her.
Deca, yeah, she's there. She's in
Where?
the back. Tell her, fala para ela vir para frente da câmera.
Vem para frente,
Vem
Mahamani.
para frente
Não.
e abre o microfone. Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
Hare Krishna.
Ah, dá para ver que são irmãs. I can see your sisters.
A gente não tá vendo.
Obrigada a você, Hare Krishna. Obrigada a você, Mahamani, por ser uma alma tão sincera. Então, Mani,
Isso.
dá para ver?
Sim, sim.
Sí, sí. Están oyendo.
Dá para ouvir, né?
Sim, dá para ver.
Então, money significa money. Money significa dinheiro. Eu dei o nome. Então, não, mas
Poxa,
eu não. Então, você entende? Peço aos devotos, devotas, já iniciados, que repitam os votos que vocês...
A câmera inteira, o áudio fica baixo.
Dá para ouvir? That means, can you hear? That's what I keep saying. Can you hear?
Se corta un poco.
agora sim.
Então, Mohammed, você segue os princípios, né? Você já entende. Você é uma veterana.
Sim, sempre tentando.
Todos nós. Então, seu nome será Sri Ratna, que significa joia da deusa da fortuna.
Hare Krishna, obrigado.
Eu vou escrever para você.
Tá bem.
Just give me this. I have to
No, ya.
in chat. Eu vou escrever seu nome. I told I'm going to write her name in the chat. Where's
On
the...
the three dots in the table. There's chat on the top. On the top.
Barulhinho.
Eu não posso continuar com o meu nome.
Não posso continuar com o meu nome.
Depois que eu mostro aqui. Não é assim, não.
Então, Sri Ratna. É o nome que dei.
Não estou escutando.
Então, so tell her in the chat that I'll talk to her later.
Okay.
That we'll communicate later.
Okay.
Oh, Radha Madhava. Tell your sister that I'll talk to her later. Because the connection's not so good, so we'll talk later.
A conexão não tá boa, então ele disse que fala com você
Agora estou escutando. Agora estamos escutando.
depois. Opa.
Então, o nome é Ratna, Sri Ratna, e eu vou conversar com você depois, a gente conversa, tá? Um pouco mais tarde.
Sim.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Next, Rocio.
Yes, it's have to find it here. Where is she?
Sorry, you have to wait through all
Where
this
is
stuff.
Rocio?
Rocio. Español, Spanish, right?
Sí,
Hare
sí.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna,
Puedes decir en español,
¿dónde
por favor.
está? She's saying please in Spanish. ¿Dónde estás? ¿Dónde estás? Great connection here.
¿Dónde estás? Te pregunta, ¿no escuchas a Cheredev?
No.
No sé qué no escucha, no sé por qué sí decía.
So why don't you tell them? I mean, I don't want to have everyone.
Ella debe desconectar la interpretación y volver al audio original.
Ah, porque está escuchando al que te interpreta.
Pero lo está escuchando, pero
Voy a parar la interpretación.
¿Me oyes ahora?
Ahora, otra vez.
¿Me escuchas?
Ahora sí.
Sí, muy bien.
Hare-
Entonces, mucho gusto. Entonces, dime, ¿cuál es tu voto?
No comer carne, huevos ni pescado. No, no tener sexo ilícito. No participar en juegos de azar. Y no intoxicarme.
Perfecto. Y al lado positivo, ¿qué vas a hacer?
Y yo, mi voto
cantar.
es hacer 6 rondas
Sí,
diarias.
sí, del Maha Mantra. Está bien, entonces, gracias. Te voy a dar un nombre que significa luz, esplendor y belleza,
Wow.
que es la palabra sánscrita ruchi. Ruchi Devi Das.
Arroz, esplendor y belleza. La
Sanskrit means
palabra
light,
Sangha
luster,
Ruchi.
splendor, beauty.
¡Haribol! ¡Haribol!
It also means, y también significa apego a Krishna. Oh,
Y también significa
I gave the other devotee is, did I translate it? No, sorry about that.
apego a Krishna.
Sri Ratna. Sri Ratna means the jewel of the goddess of fortune. So can't go wrong with that. Gracias. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Quería pedirle sus bendiciones para el Gurukula de Nueva Brayamandala en España. Voy a hacer servicios ahí a sus pies.
Ah, qué bien, perfecto. Te voy a visitar ahí.
Gracias.
Muy bueno. Es un gran servicio. Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
She said that she's going to Spain to work in the school there as a devotee, school for devotee children in Spain.
So this is how it works. We have a translator. When they translate,
I understand. So where is there anyone else?
Markandeya,
Oh, Markandeya.
also Radhamadava's nephew.
That's Radha Madhava's nephew. La Cosa Nostra.
Es
por
de la cosa
favor, los
nostra.
traductores no traduzcan ahora. No
Bien.
traduzcan ahora.
Sí, eu vou falar em português. Hare Krishna. I promise you, before the sun goes down, you will eat. So, Markandeya.
Tiene la cámara prendida. Marcandeya, no tienes la cámara prendida ahora. Está ahí, pero no está
Is the
prendida.
prashadam already served out?
No, Sircha, because it make noise. You want me to make noise?
Oh, I see. But it's ready to be
Yeah, it's
brought
ready,
out, right?
it's ready, yes.
Okay, as soon as we finish this, I promise you.
Marcandeya, can you put your
Sue me
camera
for
on?
any medical.
Tô escutando, minha câmera deu. Falhou.
Marcan.
If he hears me, we'll just do it anyway. We're
Okay,
not gonna
Sircha.
wait.
Eu estou escutando.
Tá bom. Então, Markandeya, por favor, seu voto.
Não praticar sexo ilícito, não comer nem peixe, nem carne, nem ovos, não praticar jogos de azar e não me intoxicar. E cantar 16 voltas de japa.
Então, Mahamantra, né?
Sim.
E não
Cristo
só...
me pegou muito fácil, eu sou muito careta.
Ah, não. E não cantar não só no seu aniversário, né? Também todo dia.
É, todo dia.
Not only on his birthday, but every day.
A cada 24 horas.
Ah, ainda bem, perfeito. Então, seu nome, eu estou dando um nome clássico para você. Que é o nome de Krishna, Madhava Das.
Muito obrigado. Lindo, lindo, lindo.
Vamos agora levantar um grande movimento de Prabhupada no sul do Brasil.
Com certeza. Começaremos.
Obrigado a você.
Eu que agradeço. Haribo. As referências.
Hare Krishna. Technically, I don't have to give the phone back. So I'm gonna do it. Okay, so thank you all very much for your patience, and so now we'll. Did I forget anything? As far as the second initiations, we'll take care of that. You know, we'll do it later. We'll definitely do it.
What that means, Madhava?
Madhava, there's different translations of it. It can come from the word madhu. Madhu is a famous forest, madhuvan. Madhu means honey. That's where we get English words like mead, and Spanish miel or portion smell. That's all madhu. So Madhava, Krishna, who's the Lord of the Madhu forest.
Madhava también es el señor del Madhu, del señor del bosque de Madhu.
So thank you all very much. And,
Gracias a todos.
You're good to go. Hare Krishna.
Haribo.